Hey guys, so a couple of months ago when I had mentioned that I was watching more things than I was reading this year, a few of you had the great recommendation of doing kind of what I've watched this month wrap-ups in addition to reading wrap-ups. That way, even if I don't read a lot, I still can share with you guys what media I have been consuming this month. So that is what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be doing my first what I watched this month wrap up. I'm not quite sure what I'm calling these yet, but I'm basically gonna just go through what I have been watching in the month of August. I almost said April. This is definitely not April, it's August. So first off, in the month of August, and I guess also at the end of July, I was basically having a massive Great British Bake Off binge session. So I went through every single episode on Netflix, and I went through every single masterclass episode also on Netflix. There was really just one day where I was thinking, gosh, I would really love to watch some kind of cooking show, and then decided to watch a single episode, and that just kind of spiraled into this epic binge watching session. I have to admit, I had never actually watched Bake Off before, but I can see why people get so crazy about it. It is really addicting, and you really do get attached to the contestants as the series continues. I know that sounds ridiculous, especially because I wasn't watching in real time, but I was genuinely concerned when, say, I don't know, their bread was overproofed, or, you know, if the cakes were too hot and the icing was melting. I was genuinely concerned for them. It was very different than any American cooking show that I've ever watched, in that everybody was very nice to each other, even though they were, you know, competitors. There was no sabotaging or like real vicious behavior, and I really liked that. I also have to admit that I kind of developed some weird like silver fox crush on Paul. Don't ask me how that happened, but I think it's this thing that he does this, like, he looks down at whatever it is they're doing on their bench, and then he looks up with his like super blue eyes, and yeah, I mean, not gonna lie, I definitely had a thing going for him by the end of my binge watch session. Then, in what is definitely one of my more awkward transitions, I was also watching the Ken Burns documentary series, The War. Now, of course, this was a documentary series he did for PBS back in the day, and it chronicles World War II through the eyes of different individuals and families from about 5 different US cities. And I have to say, this is not my first time watching it. It's maybe my 3rd or 4th time watching it, and I just find it so very interesting. I really like this technique of narrating from the perspectives of different cities and families. I think it makes it more personal and less of a massive, you know, war history, and more of an intimate understanding of what war does to the individual and to individual communities. I also really like that it's not just like the white man's perspective of the war, but he definitely touches on kind of the hypocrisies of what it was like serving in the military as, say, an African American, how you could literally be saving people's lives, and yet you were still expected to go back to your segregated unit and your segregated tent and your segregated food. And he does a really great deep dive on the Japanese American experience, particularly the 442nd, the young men who basically came out of the internment camps to prove themselves to their country. And of course, because it's Ken Burns, he uses actual historical footage, which just kind of makes it even more real, and I honestly could not recommend this series highly enough. I feel like this should go without saying, but just in case, if you are at all squeamish about blood or bodily injury or concentration camps or the Holocaust or anything like that, it's really, the series does not shy away from, one, talking about any of those things, but also showing you images and video from those kinds of situations. So just keep that in mind. If you think these are things that are going to be very disturbing for you, maybe don't watch this one. Now, I rewatched The War mainly because I was super excited to see Dunkirk, and I wanted to kind of get in that sounds weird to say, but to get in that kind of World War II mindset. You'll find as I do these videos in the future that I tend to do this both with my reading and my viewing. I kind of get stuck on a single topic and then want to get at that topic from a lot of different perspectives. So for me, rewatching The War was kind of preparation for going into Dunkirk, which I ended up seeing 2 times. Now, the first thing I would say is that Dunkirk is still out in theaters, at least here in California, and if you have not gotten to see it in theaters, I would highly recommend that you see it in theaters, because it is one of the few films that I have seen in the past I don't know, 3 years, let's say, that's really an experience. The first time I saw Dunkirk in theaters, the combination of just kind of the epic scale of it all and the amazing soundtrack and sound mixing creates this like feeling right here in the pit of your stomach. And honestly, within the first 15 minutes of the first time I saw Dunkirk, I was afraid I was gonna be sick because I was just so very wound up and so like sucked in and immersed that I could feel like all of this tension, all of it hitting me right here in the gut. And I just realized I might be getting a bit ahead of myself because I didn't actually say what Dunkirk is about. I guess if you are from the UK, you probably already know about Dunkirk, but here in the States, it's not really something that we learn about. Basically, the film Dunkirk tells about the actual historical Dunkirk evacuation expedition, I believe that's what it was called, where 400,000 men from the British Army got stranded on a beach in Dunkirk, France, and the Navy couldn't get to them. So the British Navy activated their civilian fleet, which made up of fishing boats and like pleasure yachts and sailboats and things, and all of these civilian boats came across the channel to rescue their soldiers and basically bring them home to safety. Now, generally speaking, I haven't seen a lot of war films, but I can genuinely say that this is a war film unlike anything else I've ever seen. One of the things I really liked is that it doesn't kind of have the tropes of more modern war films where, you know, it's like a band of brothers that comes together and then like against all odds manages to save the day before all dying themselves, except for that one guy. You know, it doesn't have that. It's literally a story about a bunch of men who are stranded, who are afraid, who are confused, who have no information, and who just want to get off the fucking beach. But of course, because it's a Christopher Nolan film, it is not quite as straightforward. He does a lot of time jumping, which is definitely something that I picked up on like halfway through the film the first time I saw it, and something that I think really you really get a better understanding of upon a rewatch. I would also say that this cast is kind of the dream team that we as a world didn't know we needed. I think Finn Whitehead was absolutely phenomenal as Tommy, who is kind of the lead character. He is basically this like pastless, voiceless young man who can really stand in for any soldier, and it almost makes it more terrifying because you can imagine that that guy is any of your friends, any of your family members, and it makes it more harrowing, I think. And in general, I think this was just a really fantastic ensemble cast where none of the actors really overshadowed the others. I know that there were, you know, larger actors like Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, Kenneth Branagh, who, like, I'm sorry, Shakespearean heartthrob right up there. None of those more seasoned actors, more famous actors, if you will, overshadowed the rest of the cast. It was just, I don't know, it was just, there was some magic juice to that film that really hit me like no movie has in the past couple of years. So if you can't tell, I really loved Dunkirk, and I would highly recommend everybody go to see it, especially here in the States. I think we tend to have a very Americentric view of history in general, and I think it's great to get kind of a story from, you know, the other side of the pond, as we say. Yeah, I don't know, go educate yourselves and be odd. And of course, I would be completely lying to you if I didn't admit that part of the reason I loved Dunkirk so much is that the cast, in addition to being incredibly talented, is also incredibly attractive. And the one young man who kind of really stood out to me was Jack Lowden, who plays one of the RAF Spitfire pilots. Now, Jack is a Scottish actor, I guess, who is not a complete newbie to film and television. So if, like me, you suddenly find yourself smitten, don't worry, there are plenty of things you can find him in. The show of his that I am currently watching right now is The Tunnel. The Tunnel is a British show, but I think it's based off of a Danish or Swedish show called The Bridge. And it's basically about what happens when a crime, or specifically a murder in this case, takes place directly on the line in, I guess, what is the Eurotunnel between France and Britain. The show focuses on two detectives, one French detective called Elise, who is a bit socially awkward to say the least, and then a British inspector named Carl Roebuck, who is definitely way more laid back and definitely considers himself a bit of a ladies' man. Jack Lowden plays the British inspector's son, so there's the connection to what I was just talking about before. The Bridge is different than most cop shows that I watch in that rather than it being a different criminal every single week, they're basically tracking a serial killer, and he's basically picking what he deems to be social truths that nobody ever wants to talk about and committing crimes to bring attention to them. So sort of social justice-y, but also just kind of a psychopathic killer. It also just feels very different from your typical American police procedural. It definitely feels very European. I don't know how else to describe it, but it feels European. It's very, it feels very dark. It's a lot less flashy, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So that is what I have been watching this month. I've had some good rewatching, some good binging, and of course have discovered some amazing new things. I also want to give a huge shout out to my patrons like Ana Fiches de Lecturas for supporting me and allowing me to take a little bit of time off in the evenings to watch shows that I love. So if you guys would like to check out my Patreon page, maybe consider becoming a patron, link is always down in the description. But for now, that is all I have for this video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I hope you are watching some good things, and I will see you next time. Bye. Then is in addition to being